the hold of Mesco. Good snap. Good hold. And the kick is blocked. Appalachian State has stunned the college football world. One of the greatest upsets in sports history. The pitch. Swing a long one. We are going to game number 7. A game-winning home run. He steps into it. Pass is caught. Diggs. Sideline. Touchdown. Unbelievable. Vikings win it. Lillard, long range 3. And it's good. At the buzzer. Damian Lillard. Are you kidding me?
Welcome to The Score. Here's your host, Brett Wiseman.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of The Score with Brett Wiseman here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobaccoroadsportsradio.com. We're here every Saturday morning, WWBG 1470 AM Greensboro. We are joined to start off the program by the one and only Larry Frank of Frankly Speaking Sports and Frankly Speaking Baseball. And Larry, before we get into the nitty-gritty, so to speak, we would be remiss if we did not issue some cross-promotion. So Tuesday, from 2 p.m. to 6, that's Eastern Standard Time, Larry and I will be live on all the platforms you are viewing this show on and that you view Larry's show on with a Frankly Speaking Baseball MLB trade deadline special. Not only do we have multi-time Cy Young Award winners on the show, I don't want to give every one of the names away. We'll leave some intrigue, but the 1989 National League MVP, a guy that caught a ball with his bare hand on the run at Busch Stadium in his MVP season. Who does that? Kevin Mitchell does. The son of Hall of Famer Hal McRae, Brian McRae, who coached in this state for the Morehead City Marlins of the Coastal Plain League. He's going to be on the program. And the guy who probably the most famous surgery on the planet is named after, he also won a Cy Young, but that's, nobody knows him because of that. Tommy John's going to be on the program. Are we going to ask him about the surgery? You'll have to tune in to find out. But we're also going to be on the air. We'll have all the phones, all the tweet notifications are going. MLB Network will be on in the background, but you don't want to watch MLB Network. You want to watch us because we're going to know before they know that we know they know we know. So you're going to know what happens just by watching us. Then you can turn over there 5 minutes later and figure out what's going on. Best show in the country, hands down, period. Tune in. That being said, let's jump into it. So, we're going to start with these guys, the St. Louis Cardinals. Jack Flaherty and Jordan Montgomery, you can pretty much throw them out. They're as good as out the door at this point. Jordan Hicks, kind of iffy now on whether or not he's going to be traded. There's extension talks apparently on that end. There's a lot of guys the Cardinals are listening on. There's guys that the Cardinals have deemed untouchable. Maybe not. Nolan Arenado may not be untouchable. He's on the back of my shirt, by the way. So it pains me a little bit to issue this. But according to the Los Angeles Times, the Cardinals and the Dodgers have discussed a package that would send Nolan Arenado and one of Jack Flaherty or Jordan Montgomery to the Los Angeles Dodgers. Now, keep in mind, Nolan Arenado has a full no-trade clause. The only team it is said that he would waive it for would be to go to the Los Angeles Dodgers. He's a native of Southern California. He grew up rooting for the Dodgers. He grew up dreaming of playing for the Dodgers. The Cardinals, in their supposed, alleged discussions, targeted Bobby Miller and Gavin Stone, two of the best pitching prospects, not just in the Dodgers organization, but in baseball, which an 8-time All-Star third baseman would garner that return. So, Larry, I pose you this. If you're the St. Louis Cardinals, when your MO a week ago was to build around Arenado, around Goldschmidt, around Nootbaar, around Jordan Walker, if your MO was to build around those four guys, why would you entertain the idea of doing what the Cardinals never do, which is blowing it up?
They're not going to blow it up. Anyone that thinks this team is going to give Nolan Arenado away is foolish. It's really foolish because if you look at this St. Louis Cardinals team, and I know it's hard to believe because of the way they played this year, but they are not 1 through 9 away from winning or being a successful team. They are a pitching staff away from being a successful team. For that reason, you mentioned Montgomery. Who else did you mention? Flaherty as being people on the trade. Those are people you want to trade away for young prospects. And in the offseason, you want to go ahead and make some moves that bolsters up your pitching staff. You do not, you have one of the best offensive teams or potential offensive teams in Major League Baseball, just at the corners alone with Goldschmidt and Arenado, and you add Walker, who's a young kid. You don't want to give that away. The question is, what do they do with Jordan Hicks? If you're not going to be able to sign him, do you trade him? And that's one of the things that's, that will hopefully get answered in the next couple of days. But if you're me, yes, hey, Bobby Miller is a great story. Gavin Stone is a great pitcher. Yes, but you can't. Pitching and defense does win. I understand that, but not at the cost of giving your leader, Nolan Arenado, away. There's other ways to go after those pitchers if you really want them.
When Nolan Arenado wanted out of Colorado, he did not seek out the Los Angeles Dodgers as his trade destination. He only wanted to go to the St. Louis Cardinals, which is why the price that the Cardinals paid for him was astronomically low, because the Rockies were so fed up, they just wanted to get rid of him and pay the Cardinals $50 million to take him. Since then, he's consistently been the Cardinals' best player, not named Paul Goldschmidt. He was a runner-up at MVP voting last year to Paul Goldschmidt. Nolan Arenado could have opted out of his contract after he saw that the Cardinals didn't sign any pitching in the offseason, which he apparently, according to a report, wasn't happy about. But then again, none of us were. He opted in. There's a reason he did. He wants to win a championship in St. Louis. He thinks they can do it. And the idea behind selling off some of these, not necessarily depreciating assets, but they're not top of the rotation pieces.
Yeah, and I tell you what, ignore the media. Okay, the media, and I know we're in the media and everything, but they're going to make up a story that sells. They're going to tell you he wants to go home. He wants to play in L.A. That's media talk. That's not Nolan Arenado. If he wanted that, he would be there already. He is not there. And the thing you hate to see is, I honestly believe they are 3 starting pitchers away from bouncing back next year, winning that division.
Yeah, when John Mozeliak said, we have 6 starting pitchers last offseason, he didn't mean we have 6 aces. He didn't mean we have 1 ace and 5 really good starters. He meant we have 6 top-of-the-rotation starters, and we're viewing Miles Michaelis as our ace. Not going to cut it.
Well, think of this. If I said to you, you're a star pitcher in Major League, whether it's AL, NL, isn't the matter here. But if I said, Brett, I'll tell you what, we needed a great pitcher to come to St. Louis and play with Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt, you'd be a fool not to say yes.
Even if you're a high swing and miss guy, the Cardinals' whole mindset of when they go out and get pitching, they prioritize pitch to contact guys because of 46 and 28 at the corners. They prioritize guys that get a lot of ground balls because they have such a good defense, because that is, quote unquote, the Cardinal way. But we won't spend a ton of time on just my team. Shohei Ohtani is a unicorn. We all know this. Dude, comes off the trade block Wednesday night. Thursday goes out and starts game 1 of a doubleheader, shoves a complete game shutout. First career complete game for him, by the way. Oh, he's not done. There's still a second game of this doubleheader that he's playing in. He's going to hit in, and not just hits 2 home runs at Comerica Park, which is like one of the 5 hardest ballparks on the planet to hit a home run in. He hits to the left center. He doesn't just hit him out. He goes to the deepest part of the ballpark. And the Angels were going to trade this guy? Really?
Well, the problem isn't trading him. The problem is retaining him. And and that's what they're concerned with. Because I'll tell you right now, Shohei Ohtani is worth 6 players by himself. I mean, if you make a trade. And I've seen that happen very, very few times. But you got to remember, when you get Ohtani, you're getting two players. You're getting a starting pitcher, and you're getting, obviously the offensive side of Shohei. But first of all, it is foolish. It sounds foolish. I know they say they don't want to trade him, but I'm telling you what, I don't think he'll get traded. But don't tell me if somebody called him tomorrow and offered 6 phenomenal players, a 6-for-1 deal or a 4-for-1 deal, that you're not going to at least open your ears up and listen.
And we have said this, and you'll hear this said, but we talked about this on your show yesterday. A lot of what you'll hear from GMs is window dressing. It's poker facing. It's, all right,
Yep.
Player A is not available with what you're offering me right now. It's not that player A is not available. He's not available right now. You got to step up the offer. If you giving me player D, C, F, and G for player A is not cutting it right now. If you give me player F, C, Z, Y, and Q for player A, then we can talk about player A. He's available if you throw player Q in there. If player Q's not in there, we're not having a conversation. That's what this is.
Yeah, and I always say this. And for example, now this isn't going to happen, but I'm just using it for argument's sake. If the New York Mets called the Angels tomorrow and said, "I'll give you Pete Alonso, Max Scherzer, and Justin Verlander, and a prospect for Shohei Ohtani, who they feel they can't re-sign and is going to be a free agent at the end of the year," that's 2 arms that help them balance of the year, a home run hitter. I don't know if they completely say no. Now, that's, folks, we're not saying that's happening. I'm just using the example of what goes on behind closed doors. You never know who, what, when, and where they're talking about this. There are so many wild things going on behind the scenes, we couldn't even tell you what they are.
And there's a lot of teams, Larry, that maybe don't know whether or not they're buying or selling and won't know it until really after this weekend wraps up. The Angels really went from sellers to buyers in a matter of 36 hours. They go out and get Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez, one of the best starters on the market and one of the best relievers on the market. So they go out and make that move. All right, they're all in. They're all in on out here and trying to win. Do the Mariners start selling pieces? Do they see what the Angels are doing and then we might not be as into this as we thought, especially when the Rangers and Astros are as good as they are? There might be 3 teams from the AL West that make the wild card. Could be 3 teams from the AL East that make the wild card. What do the Orioles do? What does Tampa Bay do? The Orioles have needs and the Rays have needs for starting pitching, and you could say the Rays could use another right-handed power bat. You look at the Dodgers. They trade for the shortstop that they desperately needed, and they were not prepared to wait until Tuesday to go get him. They gave up pitching to get him. That, I think the Dodgers operating under the assumption that the starting pitching market becoming more fluid, it was bare, really, 72 hours ago. Maybe 4 or 5 really good starters on the market. Now, Padres are shopping Blake Snell. If this weekend doesn't go according to plan for the Cubs, they might throw Marcus Stroman's name out there. The Brewers could throw Corbin Burns' name out there. He's been unhappy with Milwaukee since March when he lost his arbitration case. So there are a lot of starting pitchers that are going to be on the market. The White Sox are going to put Dylan Cease's name out there. Lance Lynn has a no-trade list, so his options are limited, but he's a good veteran arm. The White Sox also have Joe Kelly coming out of the bullpen. He's a great veteran bullpen piece. Remember, won a World Series with the Dodgers in 2020, won a pennant with the Cardinals in 2013. There are a ton. And then you throw the Cardinals' arms into it as well. There's a ton of pitchers on the market right now. And the more buyers that emerge, I think Shohei Ohtani, quote-unquote, coming off the market is the best possible thing that could have happened for the sellers, for the Cardinals, for the White Sox that are trying to sell pitching because the best pitcher on the market just went off the board.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And like I say, I'm very, very, very certain that I would be probably the most surprised person around if Ohtani is traded.
Yeah, I think even now you'd have to really be blown away for if you're for the Angels to make that kind of a move. But that's part of this whole postseason, expanded postseason, is we've really seen only how it works 1 year. The teams that don't know whether they're in it or out of it, I'm kind of viewing in my own head if you're more than 7 games out, if I'm a GM right now, if I'm more than 7 games out, I'm leaning towards selling. Because given how crowded things are, I'm leaning towards selling. But the vibe that I'm getting is that teams that are no more than 7 or 8 games out still think they're in it enough to go make a move, which means there's less sellers, which means there's more demand. So this seller's market that's developing could bring back massive hauls if the Padres decide to drop out, if the Mariners decide to drop out. The Cardinals obviously are trying to sell off pieces. They could get bigger returns than what you would normally get if you traded Jack Flaherty 2 years ago, or if you traded Jordan Montgomery last year. You're going to get a lot more than what the Yankees got when they traded Jordan Montgomery, which was Harrison Bader, and that was it.
Yeah, and also understand this. Just because you are close to the wild card team doesn't mean that you won't be a seller. A lot of people think, well, if they have a chance to make a wild card, if you have a GM that thinks they can't go further than the wild card round and not go deep into the playoffs, that's another scenario where they may say, hey, you know what? Maybe we need to get some prospects to push us over the edge in the next couple of years. So here you may have a team, I'm just using another example, like the Boston Red Sox. Okay, they're right in the thick of things, 1.5 games back in the wild card. And you may say, well, you know what? Why would they sell? Well, because they're not going to go far when they make the playoffs. So why not continue to build that team for the future?
That's exactly right. And that's why if I'm a GM, that's why I'm looking at that 7 to 8 game mark as a cut line of, when we get in, we probably ain't going to go very far. That's what the Cardinals realized. Are they out of it? No. But I think the front office is smart enough to know that they built probably the most mediocre roster they could outside of 1 through 7 in the batting order. Outside of that, all mediocrity. They had a pitching staff that they knew wasn't good enough. They went into the year with it being not good enough. It has proven to not be good enough. When your starting rotation and your bullpen aren't linked up, this is what we're seeing. The White Sox have similar problems. Now, there's teams that are in the thick of things that have similar problems that could benefit from guys that the Cardinals and White Sox and Padres have to offer. But the Cardinals know they're 11 out in the division. They're 7.5 or 8 out in the wild card. But they know that if they make some kind of a magical Cardinal-like run, they're not going to go very far. The White Sox could still make a run in the AL Central because it's arguably the worst division in baseball. They could very well make a run in that division with the talent they have. But they've already traded their best starter and their best reliever. So naturally, you think Dylan Cease, Lance Lynn, Joe Kelly, Tim Anderson, all of those guys are out the door if the right offer comes across the table. You look at the Padres, starting to fade back a little bit. They look at the scope of things in the NL West. We got to contend with the Giants, the Diamondbacks, the Dodgers. The Dodgers and Giants are going to have an arms race over starting pitching. We might want to back off here. They're listening on Juan Soto. They're listening on Josh Hader. They're listening on Blake Snell. You're going to sit here and tell me that there's not 3 suitors for those 3 guys? No. So this seller's market that's developing, it would really behoove the teams that may be in it to realize if we make some kind of run here, just getting in isn't going to be good enough.
Yeah, and I agree. And, it's also what are you going to get for these players? You got to remember when you're rebuilding, one team is trying to win now, one team is trying to win in the future. So you got to ask yourself, you may see players go, and as a fan of maybe the St. Louis Cardinals, you've been mentioning them, you may say to yourself, well, what are we doing here? We're giving away these great players and we're getting prospects back. Well, let me tell you, Cincinnati's showing you. Atlanta used all their farm system up, so they need to replenish it now. But you look at the Baltimore and the Cincinnati's, those teams are winning now because of trades they made in the previous years.
You look at the Cubs as well. They've really followed that model. You said it, the Orioles, Cincinnati. The problem with those teams is, Larry, at this time of year, they don't necessarily have the prospect assets to go out and get huge names. So they're going to have to go out and get some middle-of-the-road guys. The question is, who has the most ammo in their farm system? Because if you're kind of a casual baseball fan and you're just kind of starting to tune in because this is an exciting time of year, keep in mind, trading draft picks is barred. It's illegal in Major League Baseball. You cannot trade draft picks in Major League Baseball. You can only trade personnel and cash. So it comes down to really the teams that have the prospect capital and the Major League ready capital for teams like the Cardinals, who don't just want pitching, they want controllable pitching. A key word to remember over the course of this weekend and into Tuesday for any team is the word controllable. Sellers want guys they can control through 2026, 2028. Guys that they can either throw in there now and have under contract for 3 or 4 years before they hit arbitration, or guys that are in Double-A right now. The White Sox got two of the Angels' best prospects for Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez. So the key word is controllable.
Yeah, and I was going to hit that point.
Right. Teams are going to go after rentals. Teams are going to go after rentals. It's going to happen. But the key word for sellers is controllability. The key word for buyers is rental.
Right, exactly. They want it now, where the other people want it for a long time. And when you talk about control, that's exactly right. And, we talk about the Tampa Bay Rays. The reason that team's been so successful is they have guys that they've had control over for 3, 4, 5 years. And then, of course, when it comes time to pay them the big money, they go somewhere else, unless they do a Wando Franco or Brandon Lau type thing where they sign them. But you're exactly right. You want control over a player for the next 3, 4 years, if not more, the 5th year if possible, because that's what you build the team around.
Absolutely. Agree with you 100% there, Larry. Got to get in the break. We've gone long, but this has been fantastic. Don't forget, folks, tune in 2 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. We'll be with you till 6, a little bit after, because there might be some deals that come after the final horn blows on the deadline. But, Larry, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to Tuesday. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yep, me as well. Thanks for having me.
All right, when we take a break here, we're going to get into some quick NASCAR and some NFL talk, and then we'll get to Desmond Johnson later on in the program as well to talk Panthers Training Camp. A lot of stuff still to come. Stay tuned. All right, Larry, thanks. Back here on The Score with Brett Wiseman on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobaccaroadsportsradio.com, WWBG 1470 AM Greensboro. Our producer, Desmond Johnson, will be joining us in our next segment to talk Panthers Training Camp, what's been going on in Spartanburg with Bryce Young being the QB1 now. We'll talk some other NFL with him as well. But there's a storyline in the NFL that I wanted to touch on, but I wanted to let the dust settle on both sides of the debate, before I got into it. Running backs are complaining that they aren't getting paid enough. As much as I love running backs, we have to keep in mind that there's a reason that the Justin Tuckers of the world, are they kickers? Yeah. There's a reason that offensive linemen, who paved the way for the running backs, by the way, are getting paid more. That other positions are getting paid more per capita. The running backs, basically an entire separate union of running backs developed somehow. They all had a Zoom call where they basically just shot arrows back and forth as to why they weren't being paid enough money. They didn't realize the fact that, guys, this is 2023. Not only is the NFL a pass-first league, your position has a 6 to 8 year shelf life, basically. Is that pretty? No. At this point, I don't really know why kids coming out of college want to stay running backs. Because it's a depreciating position. It's a depreciating asset. Think of running backs like a boom or bust stock. Think of running backs like you bought into Netscape in 1997. Then Microsoft comes out with whatever they came out with, and Netscape tanks. Running backs were really popular in the 90s and in the mid-2000s, and then once we got into the early 2010s, they started to become a depreciating asset because of the style of play of the NFL and because of the style of play of running backs. The game, despite the penalties and the rules that have come into play to keep player safety at a high, running backs have continuously been one of the more injury-prone positions over the years, and teams are looking at that position with a shelf life. When they draft a running back, they have a plan in their head that after 6-8 years, we're going to throw somebody else in there. It's the reason Dalvin Cook is still a free agent. It's because he's had 2 knee surgeries. He's a great running back. The Vikings have someone they can plug in at that spot. They don't want to pay Dalvin Cook the extra money he was looking for. It's not that he doesn't deserve it. When you look at it from, and it almost sounds morbid in a way, but when you look at it from a business perspective, it's a depreciating asset. The more it's used over time, a running back is like driving a new car off the lot. If you go out to your local Mercedes-Benz dealership and buy a Mercedes, as soon as you drive it off the lot, you just lost $4,000 in value. The further you drive it, the more thousands of dollars come off the potential that you could go turn around and sell it for. When you plug a running back into your starting lineup, it loses value. If you buy a top-of-the-line baseball bat, the first time you swing it, you just lost $400 you could have made by turning around and selling it. Running backs, as great and as talented as they are, from a business model perspective right now in the NFL, are viewed as a depreciating asset because there's not enough longevity in the position. If these guys played 10, 12, 15 years, it'd be different. Barry Sanders is kind of the token model for running back longevity by retiring early because he saw the damage that being a running back was doing to his body. It's a position that, as appreciated as it is, from a business perspective, I'm not saying I agree with NFL owners at all because they're just a bunch of rich white dudes. I don't agree with those guys. Well, unless you're like me and one of the owners of the Green Bay Packers, but there's millions of us, so that's beside the point. I'm not a rich white guy, as you can tell. But when you look at it from their perspective, I'm not saying I agree with them. I see where they're coming from. I think running backs should get paid more. I think they're deserving of that. But the way ownership across the league views that position is that it's not worth enough in the long term to make those kinds of large investments. All right, got about 4 minutes left here in this segment, so let's move over to NASCAR. Tricky Triangle, Pocono, this past weekend, in case you missed it. Really, really good race. A lot of action, a lot of controversy. I have made it known to people close to me that I despise Denny Hamlin with a passion. Sunday afternoon, drove that point home. In case you missed it, Denny Hamlin pulled the same move to Kyle Larson that he pulled on Ross Chastain last year at this same track in this same race. Denny Hamlin has the gall to then say, after he doors Kyle Larson up into the wall. He then has the gall to say on his radio, well, I gave him a lane. He chose to stay in it. Denny, the amount of space between my dishwasher and my countertop is not a lane for a stock car to fit through. That's how much room you gave Kyle Larson, buddy. That's not a lane. And then he has his podcast thing on Mondays. And he does an interview where he flips off the camera. He flips off the fans. They booed him out of the racetrack. He became the all-time leader in wins at Pocono. And they booed him out of there. Heck, there were people standing outside the racetrack waiting to throw eggs at his hauler on its way back to Charlotte. People are sick of his stuff. If you're a fan of his, then you're a fan of his. I've long not been a fan of his. His style, the way he doesn't really seem to take a whole lot of accountability for things. Say what you will about Ross Chastain and the trouble he's gotten himself into. He's owned up to the things. Denny Hamlin will do anything and everything to blame it on somebody else. And Kyle Larson said that in his post-race interview. And I applaud and I commend Kyle Larson for doing that. His post-race interview was chef's kiss, spot on, as petty and as awesome as it gets. We got a rivalry developing here. These guys are friends off the track. Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin are really, really good friends when they boat together on Lake Norman or whatever NASCAR drivers do in their free time. But Kyle Larson said, Denny's always right. Because Denny Hamlin has all these friends. He knows all these people. He has his podcast where he comes out on Monday and says, here's why I was right. Here's why it wasn't my fault. It's never your fault, Denny, is it? It's always someone else's fault. There's always some way, somehow, that the driver of that number 11 Toyota finds a way to blame his idiocy and his aggressive driving on someone else. He didn't give Kyle Larson a lane. He's going to spin it that way because he knows he can get away with it. And that's what angers me so much about Denny Hamlin, is that he knows full well what he's doing. He also knows full well that he's going to spin it politician style and get away with it. And that everybody's going to applaud him 3 days later for being creative and eccentric with his podcast. Oh, what he said was hilarious. He drove like an idiot. I'm sorry. But the days of believing that nothing is his fault should be well gone. And if they're not by now, you're obviously looking through FedEx orange and purple colored glasses. If you think that anything Denny Hamlin does at this point is a correct thing to do. If you think that Denny Hamlin is never wrong, you need to take the number 11 Toyota glasses off and look at the real world. Because 9 times out of 10, it's his fault. All right, going to take a break. Desmond Johnson to talk Panthers training camp on the other side of this timeout. Welcome back to The Score with Brett Wiseman here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobaccoroadsportsradio.com. We're here every Saturday morning on WWBG 1470 AM Greensboro as well. Joining the program is our producer, Desmond Johnson, the man, the myth, the legend, the head of Tobacco Road Sports Radio, but he's here to talk about his Carolina Panthers. He's the host of the Bleav in Carolina Panthers podcast. You can hear that weekly. There's a lot of Panthers content that Des works on, and Des, with training camp starting up this weekend, I'm sure your phone's been blowing up like that of a Major League Baseball GM at this point, with requests and questions and what's this team going to look like and what's Bryce Young going to look like as QB1, and try as best as you can for us to break down some of the storylines here as back together weekend, as the NFL likes to call it, is underway.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me on. Thanks for the return of The Score. I'm sure there's a lot of folks in the triad happy that you're back. In terms of the Panthers, I think the biggest story going into it was, for me personally, in mini camps and OTAs and things of that sort, the one thing that kind of struck me was that we hadn't heard anything bad about Bryce Young. Like everything he had done had been pretty much either expected or above average in terms of what he's brought to the table. And that's played out in this first week so far down in Spartanburg, where Frank Wright had no issue naming him quarterback number one after day one, day two. He has a full grasp of the playbook, which is pretty insane for a rookie coming in. And he seems ahead of the game. He's pretty much looked as advertised this week. And I'm curious to see how they're going to use him preseason, if at all, especially with what we just saw with Joe Burrow yesterday or the other day. And some other stars going down, Jalen Ramsey, some other stars going down with injuries here early. I'm curious to see if they're going to play him at all in preseason. And just when live bullets start flying around, if that poise is going to transition to actual real games. But Bryce Young has been in the spotlight since he was a kid. I mean, he was a starting quarterback at Mater Dei in California in high school. He's a starting quarterback for Alabama in college, wins the Heisman. So like, this is nothing new for Bryce Young, and he carries himself that way. I think that's the most refreshing part of it. It's almost like it's like Cam Newton flipped inside out, where like you can tell he's cocky, that he knows he's really good, but he's really humble about it and in terms of his place and where he is or whatnot. I think he's fitting like a hand to a glove with the Panthers right now.
And I think the best verbiage I guess I could come up with for his, his mannerisms and his attitude would be quiet assassin. Like you said, he knows he's the guy. He knows he has the talent. He knows he kind of has that, I'm him mentality in his mind, but he's not going to go out and flaunt it. He's going to go out and take care of business. He's not necessarily going to let you know about it with his mouth. He's going to let you know about it when his play does the talking.
Yeah, and again, he's been that way from day one. This isn't like a flip or something different once he became a pro. He's been like this on the biggest stages from high school and college. I was watching somebody talk about how C.J. Stroud and Ohio State had played really well against Georgia in the national semifinals this past year. People forget Bryce Young did that the year before against that Georgia defense. So, I mean, he is proven on the biggest stages that he can basically rise to the occasion. And again, I've compared him to Steph Curry in terms of potential, where his size has been looked at as a detriment. People were worried about him getting injured and all this other stuff. Same thing with Steph when he first came into the league. His frame wasn't big enough. He wasn't going to survive shooting threes. And in effect, what happened was Steph changed the game. Like, he changed the way we play basketball. And I'm looking at Bryce in the same situation. Like, this dude has the potential to change the way we look at quarterbacks going forward in terms of how we view them in high school. Like, you'll see a 5'9", 5'10" quarterback in high school all the time. Usually it's the best player on the team. They just put him at quarterback. But then usually what happens is if they get a scholarship or something like that to go on to college, they get moved because they're too short. So they'll get moved to wide receiver, they'll get moved to running back, they'll get moved to someplace, some other skill position, cornerback or whatever, and then they'll get a chance to play quarterback. If Bryce pulls this off and actually becomes a star in the making, you might start seeing more 5'9", 5'10" quarterbacks at every level, basically giving them a shot to become Bryce. So I do feel like Bryce has an opportunity to be the Steph Curry of the NFL. It's just a matter of how quickly can he adapt.
And you spoke on his quick grasp of the playbook. Speaks to something that I targeted for him right back towards the draft, which is he probably has the most football IQ, or the highest football IQ of any quarterback I've seen come in the draft in the last couple of years. He's got that grasp, that knowledge of the game, and that's something that in these training camp practices, as he gets more accustomed to the speed of the NFL game, especially when those ever important joint practices come into play and whatever preseason reps he gets, as he adjusts to the speed of the game, his adjustment period, I feel like, might be accelerated because of that IQ level.
Yeah, and that was one of the main separators for Bryce and the other quarterbacks in this class that came in through the draft, was that his ability to process was off the charts. There's some sort of test or something they give these quarterbacks, some kind of written thing or whatnot, to kind of gauge their ability to comprehend, analyze, process information quickly. And he like completely obliterated the field. I think he had like a 98 or something like that on his score. So that was the thing that attracted the Panthers to him. And if you're a Panther fan, you watch Blueprint, the YouTube series that the Panthers put together, that was kind of a behind the scenes Hard Knocks kind of type of 3-part episode that's on the Panthers YouTube channel right now, it's very clear in those episodes that Bryce Young was their guy from the very beginning. When they traded up to number 1, they traded up with the intent to draft Bryce Young. And I think the narrative was that they didn't know who they were going to get. It was going to open competition because they flew around all over the place and looked at all these quarterbacks. But by watching that miniseries, you can tell it's Bryce Young. And if any of these other quarterbacks convince us otherwise, then hey, that's great. But for right now, it's Bryce. We're moving up for Bryce Young, and you can see why they moved up for Bryce. The players are talking about him like he's already a leader. They're already starting to follow him, which is unique in NFL. Usually, rookie quarterbacks don't get that veteran pat on the back so early. But they clearly, whatever he's doing, he's impressing the vets with the Panthers and the coaching staff to the point where they're pretty much handing him the keys right now.
When you look at this roster overall, what are some storylines and some things you're watching here this first weekend of training camp? Maybe some position battles, some wide receiver versus DB battles. What are some things you're looking for here this weekend that might stick out?
Well, of course, the running narrative nationally is that the Panthers don't have a number 1 wide receiver. So we're looking at the wide receiver group. Hopefully one of those guys is going to emerge. I don't necessarily think they need a number 1 wide receiver. I just think they need a core group of guys that you can depend on to catch the football. And I'd rather have 3 or 4 guys with 40, 50 catches each than one dude with 120. Like, to me, that the offense has the multiple wide receivers spread out. It's harder to defend than to have a number 1. You can kind of scheme that a little bit better if you know exactly who the dude is that you're supposed to be, double teaming or whatnot. I think coming out of that, the rookie Jonathan Mingo out of Ole Miss, if he can follow the footsteps of A.J. Brown, another Ole Miss wide receiver who's a top 10 wide receiver in the league today, he was kind of compared to him coming out of college. So we're looking at Mingo, seeing if he can separate a little bit. Adam Thielen, the vet that came over from the Vikings, probably the oldest wide receiver on the team, but he's the old head. So we're kind of looking, he might be in the beginning, the go-to guy for Bryce. There's just a lot of dudes in that wide receiver room. Laviska Shenault, they're kind of running him in the backfield as well. Kind of a dual type role for him. So we'll kind of see what they do regarding him. It's going to be interesting to see that wide receiver room, who emerges as the 2 starters. I'm hoping it's going to be Terrace Marshall Jr. and Jonathan Mingo with Adam Thielen in the slot. And then you put Shenault in spots and others in spots. There's going to be an odd man out, maybe Shi Smith, Demir Bird. There's going to be someone that doesn't make this team that's going to make it someplace else just because there's not enough slots. And then who's going to emerge as the 3rd cornerback over on the other side of the ball? J.C. Horn, Dante Jackson back from injury, both looking good. C.J. Henderson is the one that people expect to take over that 3rd cornerback slot. He's a former top 10 draft pick from Jacksonville in 2020. Panthers were looking at him then. Matt Rule was wanting to draft him back in 2020 in his first year. Didn't get a chance to. They traded for him. Came over last year. He's up. He's down. We can't get a good beat on CJ. He might have a great game and then have a horrible game the one right after. So they did not extend his 5th-year option in the offseason. So he's in his 4th season right now, kind of a prove-it year for him. So he has an opportunity to really show what he can do and maybe latch on here, or he may not be here next year.
So obviously C.J. Henderson's going to have a strong camp, not just for his sake, but his sake contract-wise, but if he wants a spot on this roster. And you touched on, you don't necessarily need a number 1 wide receiver. And I think what a lot of people point to is, there's no DJ Moore. They don't have a number 1 guy. Well, you look at the Kansas City Chiefs last year. If anything, they got better as an offense completely because they didn't have a Tyreek Hill, because Patrick Mahomes was able to spread the ball around on a consistent basis. You don't always need a number 1.
And really, I look at it more like the quarterback figures out who the number 1 is. Like, we don't. Like, the quarterback is going to determine who his number 1 guy is, the guy he's most comfortable with, the guy he's going to target the most, the guy he feels like can go get that 10 yards or touchdown or whatever. It's not us. We're not going to anoint Jonathan Mingo the wide receiver number 1. They're going to do it with their play on the field. And to me, it's like, this team is so young. To say that they need a number 1 in order to do anything, it's kind of far-fetched considering everything else they've done in the offseason. To say that this one position, this one player is going to affect their entire season into the conference that they're in in the NFC, where there's really no clear favorite in the division they're in the NFC South, which is a dumpster fire right now all around us. I feel like it's just kind of foolish to say that, one player, one position is going to determine a 17-game season in the NFL. Like, there is no position like that other than quarterback. So, I mean, plus Frank Reich likes to run the ball anyway, and he throws it through his tight ends. So it's not even that big of a deal. Who's the number one wide receiver in Indy? Exactly.
I can't name it. Yeah.
So, I mean, like, he plays through his tight ends. He was playing through Jonathan Taylor in the run game, and they build the offensive line and that kind of thing. It's smash mouth old school football. He's not so concerned about a number one. And again, if Frank Wright and offensive coordinator Thomas Brown and quarterback coach Josh McCown and special advisor Jim Caldwell, I mean, it's like an Avengers list of coaches that they've assembled over there. If they aren't worried about having a wide receiver, like de facto number one, like a DeAndre Hopkins or whatever people were trying to push on them, if they're not worried about it, I'm not worried about someone on Twitter or whoever thinking that the Panthers need a number one. I'm going to trust the minds in that room, the ones with the Super Bowl rings and experience, and they've played the game. If they've seen what they've seen in the wide receiver room already, if they're comfortable with that going in, I'm comfortable with it too.
If anyone needs a reminder of Jim Caldwell's pedigree, even pre-NFL, he was the first coach at Wake Forest to win a bowl game in 20 years back in 1999. He won the Aloha Bowl back in Honolulu. So if you need a reminder here on Tobacco Road, Jim Caldwell's got a pretty good pedigree. But you mentioned Frank Reich's strength was in the running game in Indianapolis, and the offensive line not just will be important in the running game, but will be important in protecting Bryce Young. And it's been a point of contention, I think, for a lot of people, both nationally and within our circle, a point of contention and discussion when you talk about this Carolina Panthers squad. So what does this O-line look like right now? And do you think it has the potential to shake up to be good enough, not just to protect Bryce Young, but to put up a top 15 rushing offense in the NFL?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, people forget the one thing they kept when Frank Reich came in, their first priority was to keep the offensive line intact from last year. I think people forget, since the Panthers picked first overall in the draft, they must think the Panthers had the worst record or were horrible. They were normal. They were originally picking ninth, and they were game out of winning the division. Like, they despite their own selves, almost won the division last year, firing the head coach after week 6, trading your best player midseason. There was some games where we didn't even throw the football, you know what I mean? Like, and we still almost won the division. That's why it just drives me nuts when people are like, oh, they'll win 6 games, 7 games. That's impossible. There's no way this team with the coaching staff and what they've brought in can duplicate what they did last year in a worse division. So, I mean, I feel like the perception of the Panthers is from the previous regime, but they're not here. Like none of them are here. So it's like, it's a whole different ball game now. So we'll see what they do going forward, but it's been a good first week of training camp so far.
And when you look at the coaching staff overall, I think the one thing that I point to is that this coaching staff's got to kind of cultivate and create its own narrative. And when you look at the scope, the landscape of this division as we enter the season, Baker Mayfield's in Tampa Bay. We know how that experiment went in Carolina. We don't know what Derek Carr is going to do in New Orleans. Look, Derek Carr needed a fresh start, okay? And I said this a couple weeks ago. His out for Vegas was, oh, they made my wife cry. Dude, my wife would cry too if I threw that many balls to the other team, okay? Like, you needed to get out of there. You needed a fresh start. He's going to a good place in New Orleans, a place that's famous for revitalizing quarterbacks. Drew Brees from San Diego. And then you look at Atlanta. There is a lot of unknowns when you look at the Atlanta Falcons. There's just unknowns abound in this division. And the only team that has anything consistent, really, coming back from last year, to me, is Carolina.
And that was the plan in terms of they retained James Campion, who's probably the best offensive line coach in the game. Ike Ekwonu was the first round pick last year, slid in left tackle, played great. They do have some injury concerns. Austin Corbett got hurt at the end of last year. He's not going to be ready at the beginning of this year. Cade Mays will probably come in and start for him. They did trade up for Chandler Zavala from NC State, who played right beside Icky in college. So He has a pec injury right now, so he's on the PUP list also. But the offensive line was a thing that they wanted to make sure they kept intact when this coaching staff came in, because the Panthers were rushing for – there was games they rushed for 160, 180 yards for the game, last year, where they just kept it on the ground and just pounded people. And that helped the defense, that helped their stats, that helped everything, and kind of pulled them out of the funk. So to me, that shows they recognized talent. It wasn't a my way or the highway type thing when Frank Reich came in. He recognized the offensive line is the one thing on this team that I need to keep together. That's the one thing they've been building, that and the defensive line. They've been building that through the past 2 or 3 drafts, and we're pretty much getting it right. So guys on the defense side like Derek Brown, Brian Burns, and then on the offensive side, of course, like I said, with Icky, Ekwonu, and those guys, keeping those together creates a strong foundation going forward. Speaking about the rest of the division real quick, New Orleans is the oldest team in this division. Their average age is like 28, which is actually pretty old in the NFL. And I keep seeing people picking New Orleans because they see the familiar names, Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, Cam Jordan. All those guys are old, and all those guys have been injury riddled for the past couple of years. Like, I feel like New Orleans is going to be that surprise team that does not win this year because of injury, age, everything else. And Dennis Allen, their head coach, has a losing overall record as a head coach. I don't believe he's ever had a winning season, if I'm not mistaken. So
he has not.
I don't know what they're going to do. Tampa, I think Tampa's in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes, to be honest. I think they're trying to, without saying it, I think they're going to try to get Caleb Williams or Drake May or somebody in the draft next year and rebuild around that. And then you've got Atlanta, who I think might be the biggest threat to Carolina and winning this division. Just depends on which quarterback they land on. They got the best offensive line probably in the division, save for Carolina. They just drafted the running back Robinson, the top 10 pick, so they'll probably rely on that run game. But Atlanta, they do have some holes in defense, but Atlanta's probably the biggest threat to it. But if Carolina can get through these first 4 games at 3-1, 4-0, something like that, the rest of the schedule kind of plays out fairly well for Carolina. They got a couple stretches where they have 3 home games in a row. It sets up for Carolina to win this division. I know it sounds crazy to people that like to harp on Carolina and make fun of them and whatnot, but those will be the ones that disappear come December when Carolina's sitting at, 12-4 or whatever it is, and they'll forget that they were even talking about Carolina in a bad way, because that's how it always happens.
There's an easy way to shut those people up real quick, and that's win football games. Desmond Johnson, host of Bleav in Carolina Panthers, and our producer. Des, thanks so much for hopping on the program, and we'll be sure to, if we need some advice from the cat cave, to come straight to you.
Hey, man, if you guys want Panther content, you can go to youtube.com/@Tobacco Road Sports Radio. The Keep Pounding Podcast Network is there. You can find all kinds of different a couple of podcasts there. Inside the Vault just debuted this week with Ryan Smith interviewing Joe Person from The Athletic. So you can definitely get that stuff. And Bleav in Panthers is back now too. And you can catch that on the Bleav Podcast Network.
Des, thanks so much. And keep pounding, my friend.
You got it.